Yo, what up, guys? It's Derp here with another video about the IronMace versus Nexon court case. This time I'm doing what I usually do. Sorry, the script's a little off. Um, and talking about the court case, but I am not going to be going over documents themselves or citing the case itself very closely. Instead, I'm going to be making a video to kind of document my opinion over the case and go over the timeline as it is now. And kind of as like a little refresher. Um, there's just some common theories and misconceptions that I want to cover, as well as my opinion. I kind of want to get my opinion on record for anybody who cares. So, what am I going to cover? So, I'm going to cover where we're at now first. That's going to be pretty brief. And then I'm going to go over what the timeline looks like, a loose timeline from like here until August. And then I'm going to do some common theories and misconceptions, and then I'm going to go over what I think and do a TLDR. So if you only care about the TLDR, just skip to the end. I'm trying to keep these things a little bit shorter, but, you know, my videos usually run from 20 to 40 minutes, so keep that in mind. I know it's been a few days since I did a deep dive into some documentation. I promise that I'll do a live stream here soon. There's more of that 213-page document that I want to go over. There's also another video I have planned that is going to dig into that document. There's another evidence video that I have planned, and there's actually some like 2 or 3 more documents in that video that I want to are in that 213-page declaration that I really want to look at. So I'll have videos about those as well. Those are going to be my next like 2 or 3 videos. So yeah, there was just some important videos that I wanted to make first, like this one and the 100 video channel update. Those two I just kind of felt like they needed to get done. This one and the last one. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you all. As always, huge thank you to everybody who's been watching, subscribing, leaving comments, and joining the guild. You know, I'm going to start blasting guild members' names as well as people who give me supers on the side scroll of the screen, so should be over here. So your guys' support keeps me moving forward. Yeah, huge thanks to blank blank 4597 for the $50 super comment. Like, that's just mind blowing. And you just bought me a new microphone, so it'll be on its way soon, and I'm going to be sure to show it off on stream and say that it's from you, because you basically bought that. You and everybody else who's been doing supers and subs, because now I could get the mic and the mic stand, like the arm that's going to come off the side of my desk. You guys are amazing, and I can't. There's no way for me to thank you guys enough. But yeah, let's get to what we came here for: some juicy speculation and some timeline info. As of the filming of this video, we are pretty much in stasis mode. A bunch of court dates have been set and extensions have already been asked for, so now we just kind of have to wait for new information, right? Officially, we have 2 dates that will both move the United States and Korean cases forward. The first is kind of confusing, as that has to do with the Korean courts, and I'm not really an expert in that field, nor do I have any Korean legal expertise. What we do know is that it's what the date of July 19th is either one of 2 things: the last day that Nexon and IronMace can turn in evidence for the injunction hearing, or it is the injunction hearing itself. There has been conflicting arguments and conflicting news on the topic coming out of Korea, so we just kind of have to wait and see, right? So there's no real way for us to tell unless we talk to a Korean law expert, which I'm not going to trust anybody on Reddit. I'm not going to trust conflicting news from Korea. I will trust a trusted Korean legal expert if anybody knows one. So I'm just saying that it's either one of those 2 things. It's either the cutoff date for evidence, or it is the actual preliminary injunction hearing itself. And that happens on 7/19/23, sometime around 9 a.m. South Korea time. The next important date is the date of the early case conference in the United States. The early case conference is where most of the pretrial hearings take place, like motions for dismissal or preliminary injunction hearings. All that stuff gets wrapped up on that date. both parties have to appear in court and argue out each motion. Then they go over the rules of the case as well as go over a better and more defined timeline. So that's when we'll know if the U.S. case is dismissed or if there's any form of preliminary injunctions that will take place in the United States. That date is 7/26/23 at sometime around 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time because it's in Seattle, Washington. Yeah, and that's basically where we're at. We're waiting on court dates. There hasn't been any new announcements, motions, documents filed recently outside of what most people have already covered, including myself, and what I'm currently covering. Like, there's not really much. To be honest, there probably won't be anything big that comes out until either one of those dates. So, adding to this, the Korean legal system does keep most of their documents sealed by the public, and the only people that work for the Korean legal system or the courts directly can access those documents. So, like, anything that's important, we could get dates and times and like minor updates, but we probably won't know much about what's happening in Korea unless it's used as evidence in the United States or we hear some kind of information from Korean news sources or IronMace directly or even Nexon. Like, unless somebody talks about it or they share that information with the United States court, we probably won't know. But yeah, what does the timeline look like moving forward? So this is like from now until August, basically, is what I'm going to cover in this video. I posted a link to the Cornell law for the FRCP 26 because it's mentioned in the section below. But yeah, as seen above, we should know more about early access or have more information on the court cases around the middle to end of July. So only a few weeks from now, we'll have a lot more information, if not possibly early access. Yeah, this is when we'll find out about any injunctions or when the actual injunction hearings will take place. Everything kind of hinges on the outcome of any preliminary injunction hearing. Settlements will rely on that. Early access will rely on that. Pretty much everything hinges on those preliminary injunction hearings. That's how it is for a lot of cases. It's pretty common. After that, things are a little bit more unclear, but we can make loose estimations of where dates might take place. But in the interest of time, I do plan on making a more in-depth video about what we can, if the United States case doesn't get dismissed and it does move forward and ends up going to trial, what would that timeline look like? I'm going to make an entire video on that because it's a lot of information to cover. But for now, we need to kind of focus on two sets of dates. The Korean case, which only has one really date that's important, and that's 7/19/23. That's either the evidence deadline or the preliminary injunction hearing itself. We don't really know yet. And then as far as the United States case, the first date that's important and probably the most important date in this document is 7/26/23, and that's the deadline for FRCP 26F conference, which is the early case conference. And then 8/9/23 is the initial disclosures pursuant to FRCP. So basically, more information gathering and making sure everything that happened in the early case conference and with the case filing is relevant and accurate. All of that stuff has to be disclosed by 08/09/2023, and then they're going to hold a secondary conference after that called the Combined Joint Status Report and Discovery Plan, as required by FRCP and Local Civil Rule 26F, and that happens on 8/23/23. And that's going to be basically, if they're pushing any more motions further, that's, one of the last chances they have to do it without special circumstance. They're going to be going over all of the rules and motions in place. It's kind of the last chance for, if there's an appeal that needs to be made and stuff like that, that's going to happen then. And then they kind of establish a hard deadline for discovery, right? And then, yeah, I have the link according to Cornell law right here as well. So that's the same link. Sorry. As seen above, we can see pretty clear timeline between 7/26 to 8/09 for when the United States case really starts. So that's like the meat of the case up until discovery and the trial. So this stuff happens, then we go into basically we go in from pretrial to discovery, and then there's one last conference after discovery, and then we go directly into trial. So we're in pretrial. We're entering pretrial as of 7/19/20 or 7/26/23 in the United States, and then after 8/23/23 we go into discovery. And that's where most of the information will come from. But yeah, as seen above, it's pretty clear what happens. The timeline for pretrial is 8/26 to 8/09, and that's when the case really starts. Unless there are extreme circumstances, these dates should not change. What should be noted is that most cases actually settle in this window between the early case conference and discovery. So sometime between now and the end of discovery is usually when a case will settle. If it's going to settle out of court, it usually happens by then. Because then you have a very short window to make up any kind of settlements until you go to trial. You can settle in trial, but they'll get a pretty quick indication of like who has the stronger case once they get to trial. And it's usually more expensive to settle then, so they try to avoid that. And the court kind of pressures people to settle as early as possible. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasoning why people settle before, like either during the pretrial or during discovery. If the U.S. case is upheld and IronMace has an injunction placed against them, they cannot release Dark and Darker in the United States. If the U.S. case is dismissed or Nexon has an injunction placed against them, then IronMace can release early access in the U.S., but it kind of moves down to the Korean case, right? So then if the United States case gets dismissed or Nexon has a U.S. injunction placed against them, then it falls to the Korean case to kind of settle everything, at least until trial. Should IronMace get approval to release Dark and Darker in any way, then they have a lot more leverage to use against Nexon and a lot more money to fight this case. This might lead Nexon to accept a much smaller settlement to leave IronMace alone. Conversely, should IronMace be prevented from releasing Dark and Darker at this point, Nexon's bargaining power goes up significantly, as does the pressure on IronMace, making a costly settlement for IronMace almost guaranteed, at least in my opinion. What makes this case a little bit more confusing and difficult to determine is actually the fact that both cases, or both companies are based in Korea, and there's an ongoing case in their home country. So the U.S. case might be made far less important should the Korean courts decide on an injunction before 7/26. So if that 7/20/19 or 7/19 day is actually when they decide the injunction, that's pretty much going to determine whether or not EA comes out at all. If IronMace is allowed to release Dark and Darker in Korean courts, they may have a massive victory globally, which would drastically increase their chances of fighting the case long term or getting a really small, like getting away with a really small settlement with Nexon. They might just have to pay like Nexon's legal fees and a little bit of extra money and tell Nexon to fuck off, right? And this is because if Nexon is prevented from interacting with IronMace's business operations, then they might not be able to issue DMCA takedown notices even in the United States. And so that's, if the injunction in Korea goes against Nexon, then they might be prevented from issuing DMCAs globally, which in turn almost guarantees Nexon's willingness to accept a rather small settlement to leave IronMace alone. So, however, should Nexon prevent IronMace from releasing Dark and Darker in Korea, that decision would be, in effect, a global decision, at least with all countries that cooperate with the World Intellectual Property Organization and World Trade Organization. Therefore, that would kind of force IronMace into an extremely costly settlement with Nexon and possibly have to give up a percentage of the sales, right? Or worse. Everything kind of depends on the Korean courts and if they can come to an injunction decision on 7/19/23. If they can't, and they push that back till August, then the U.S. courts might decide the fate of early access and Dark and Darker on 7/27/23. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're at and the timeline for now, at least up until August. So we might know exactly what's going on with early access as soon as 7/19/23 to 7/26/23. If we don't know then it'll be pushed back to probably around, 7/19 or 8/19/23 to 8/27 or 8/23/23. Yeah, 8/23/23. That's kind of when it'll go back to. It'll be pushed back like a month, and we'll know more information then. So I also wanted to cover some common misunderstandings. A lot of people don't seem to understand some stuff about this case, and one of those things is that the employment contract isn't really everything, and this case isn't all or nothing. To begin with, the United States Korean case, both cases are trade secret cases first and foremost. They're not contract disputes. Therefore, the non-compete clause and other non-IP related clauses don't really matter too much. What is important to the case, as far as the employment contracts are concerned, is all of the clauses relating to IP, and then stuff that relates to whether or not the contract is still valid at all. The only reason the non-IP related issues are even relevant to either case is because they can be cited to invalidate or validate different portions of the contract. That's really it. So we shouldn't really waste time arguing over the non-competes or paid time off portions or any of the other random stuff that's in that contract. All that really is of significance is the IP and whether or not the contract is still valid. So people should also remember that most cases like this don't end up in an all or nothing situation. Usually, courts will rule in favor of what's legal, what's best for the market, what's best for the countries involved, and what's best for the consumer. That usually means allowing products to come to market, especially if the damage has already been done and is irreparable, which in this case, that's the exact situation. That's at least as far as Nexon claims. So for Nexon to try to have Dark and Darker shut down, sorry, Birdie is scratching me. What's that, Bird? For Nexon to have Dark and Darker shut down, they don't really get anything, but I'll go into that later. Nobody would get anything in that case. But yeah, these cases are more about companies being made whole, in air quotes, and setting a precedent. Nexon knows that they have a very slim chance of keeping Dark and Darker off of the market. I don't think that's their goal here. And I don't think that's what they care about. I think what they care about is getting their money back, being made whole, and really sending a message to the rest of the market, right? Their message is, if you steal from a big corporation, prepare to lose your ass. You're going to get sued. You're going to lose a lot of money. You might end up owing a large majority of the profit that you get from that project to the corporation anyway, right? So it's just not worth it to steal from big corporations. That's the message they want to send. All they really care about is getting a W next to their name and raking in a ton of money. They want the record to reflect that IronMace lost and had to fork over a bunch of money to Nexon to release Dark and Darker. That's how they send a message. They don't kill Dark and Darker. That's not their intention. The only reason that they really ask for the rights to begin with is to increase the damages should they win, right? Very rarely, unless it's something that's devastating to an entire market, like should Dark and Darker release and it just prevent Nexon from ever being able to make video games again, or anything ever similar, or anything that would drastically change their revenue stream moving forward, very rarely will companies or projects like this get shut down entirely. Courts have done that, but it's not as common as some people might have you think. Usually, what happens is that all damages will end up being proportional to how much the courts believe belong to the person that was stolen from, so in this place Nexon, if anything. The larger Nexon asks for in the beginning, the larger the damages will be if they win. It's pretty simple. If you don't go in saying that they stole everything, you might get far less than you want, right? So you don't really go in saying, realistically, they stole 10% of our, like 10% of that is our IP, right? Just the stuff that happened early on. Everything after this point is all theirs, but we want at least 10%, right? Like, you don't go in saying that. You say, no, they stole all of it. They couldn't have done it without us. We want full rights to this IP. So that way, when you settle or you're awarded damages, it's talked down to like 50%. It's bargaining. It's what you do in bargaining. You one person starts high, one person starts really low, and then you meet in the middle. Same thing happens in court. So what do I think is going to happen? That's pretty easy. I think Nexon and IronMace are going to reach a settlement, and they will probably do so after we hear about the injunctions. That's usually what happens. I'm going to take the safest route and say that 80% of all cases are decided between, or 80% of all settlements happen between the early case conference and when they start gathering evidence. So there's really only, as far as I'm concerned, there's really only a few ways that this can play out. One party wins the injunction fight, either or. A modified injunction gets put in place favoring one party over the other, or there's no injunctions put in place, and however that plays out will decide the outcome of a settlement agreement or the likelihood of a settlement agreement. So let's get into what happens if one party wins. If IronMace is awarded an injunction against Nexon in full, Nexon will probably fight that in an appeal. I guarantee it. If Nexon loses in an appeal, they can't push for another appeal. The injunction stands, and Nexon can't send DMCAs or do anything to interfere with IronMace's business. So they will probably immediately say, here's a settlement, here's our lowest settlement that we'll accept, and either IronMace can accept it and they just wash their hands of it, and then they get left alone. If Nexon wins the appeal, then 80 or 90% of the time what ends up happening is a modified injunction will be put in place, and I'll talk about those below. If Nexon is awarded an injunction against IronMace in full, then IronMace will fight it in appeals. If IronMace loses in appeals, they're kind of done for, and will probably settle with Nexon for some astronomical amount of money, as well as a percentage of sales from all Dark and Darker and related products, right? If they win in appeals, however, they'll probably keep fighting or find a reasonable settlement agreement. They'll probably meet in the middle. A modified injunction is put in place if that happens. If the modified injunction favors IronMace, IronMace will be allowed to release early access, but they'll probably have to put up a bond. And what that means is that they'll have to set aside a large amount of money or a percentage of sales up front. And if they can't meet those obligations of the bond, then they can't release Dark and Darker. If the modified injunction favors Nexon, it's basically the opposite, right? IronMace can't release early access, and Nexon will have to put up a bond, which would be a massive amount of money that would cover all the estimated earnings from Dark and Darker. Most likely somewhere close to $100 million. And then should Nexon lose, all that money goes to IronMace, right? So if they can't fulfill the bond or they choose not to, then IronMace gets to release Dark and Darker. That's kind of how those modified injunctions work. If neither party wins an injunction, that means that IronMace can still release Dark and Darker. However, Nexon can still issue DMCAs. Nothing really changes, and both parties will argue over the settlement amount until a damaging piece of information is found in discovery, or one party really thinks that they're going to win, or one party starts running out of money. Once one of those things happen, they'll probably end up coming to a settlement agreement. So in short, and the TLDR, the most likely outcome is a settlement. It's like a 90% chance that this case will settle, at least in my opinion. I think that settlement agreement will favor IronMace, and I think it will come sooner rather than later. We should have more information about early access and injunctions and possibly even a settlement sometime between middle to end of July. But everything really depends on the outcome of the Korean injunction case, when that happens and how that plays out. Unless nothing changes in Korea and the United States case is upheld, then it might come down to the injunction case in the United States. Whatever happens, we should know more about both the Korean and U.S. cases sometime between July 19th and July 26th. The only thing that could really change that is if the Korean courts can't make a decision on the 19th, in which case gets pushed back to the middle of August. Then, at least to the best of my knowledge. But overall, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the United States case might get dismissed, and even if it doesn't, my money would be on a modified injunction in both the Korean in the United States that favor IronMace, which would allow early access to come out. IronMace might have to put up a bunch of money in order to do that, but or they might have to put up a bunch of like a percentage of sales, but at least they'll be able to release EA and they'll make upwards of $100 million at least in sales. That's not what they'll take home, but yeah, like that's how much revenue that they could be looking at. But yeah, the reason why I think that is because courts want money and they want to save time. Any money that's allowed to flow into the market will be taxed heavily, and some will make its way back to the court system. Allowing products to hit the market is usually in everyone's best interest. If Dark and Darker is prevented from releasing, no one makes near like anything really. And if it's allowed to come out, Nexon, IronMace, the U.S. courts, and the Korean courts would all be they would all be benefiting. If they threw it away, they're throwing away a large portion of over $100 million in potential sales, right? So the chances of Dark and Darker just being blocked entirely, in my opinion, are very, very slim, and I don't think anybody wants that. Consumers don't want it. IronMace doesn't want it. Nexon doesn't want it. The courts probably don't want it. Unless there's something blatantly illegal going on, I highly doubt that early access or release doesn't happen, and I would put the chances of early access happening sometime between mid to late July and middle to late August at probably like 80%. So within the next like few weeks to the next month, I would say probably like 70% chance that we're going to see early access, if not higher. But yeah, that's about it. As always, yeah, I love you guys. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support and for joining me on this crazy adventure. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. If you want more content even faster, please be sure to join the guild by following either the YouTube membership link or the Patreon link below. Yeah, you guys are the best. You guys are champions. Keep on watching. Thanks. Peace.